What's up, guys? This is Tyler with Reversion Raceworks, and we're kicking off our first build series with this heavy-duty Suburban.
Yep, I'm going to be hanging out with the guys for this build, right? So I'm Spencer. We got a lot planned in a limited amount of time. So here's our plan for the truck. And for those of you who haven't seen it before, 1999, big block, 2500 two-wheel drive Suburban. Unique truck. We bought it sight unseen out in California, shipped it out here to Jersey, and we're looking to have some fun with it today. So our intent is in 3 days that we took off from work, we are going to try and build this out into our interpretation of a 90s sport truck. What that entails is getting rid of this brush guard and LED lights. We're putting a cool diesel bumper on there. We're getting the Tahoe limited fog lights on there, quad sealed beams, and then a paint matched grille. So that's going to be our front end deal for the truck. For the sides, we got wheels and tires, Methods and Toyos. They're pretty slick, so you guys are going to get to see that here in a second. And then what are we doing for suspension, Ty?
You know we gotta drop this thing to the ground. Not really. We still want to use the truck. It's gonna have a 3/4 drop kit from our friends at DJM. We're gonna retain the factory springs, factory leaf springs, shackled drop in the back, spindles up front, and we're gonna do a full factory rebuild on the front suspension. So new control arms, new ball joints, new tire rod ends. Nothing too fancy, but we just want to freshen it up so it's a nice, reliable truck to go to shows and take the guys around. Coming around to the back, we're going to do a paint matched rear bumper. We already got new taillights on it. We got to do new weather stripping because there's kind of a kiddie pool in the back. But this thing's going to be pretty slick when it's all said and done.
Yep, we got 72 hours, so come along for the ride.
While we're in here doing the DJM lowering spindles and shocks, we thought it'd be a good idea to refresh the whole front end. So we got factory replacement lower control arms and upper control arms, new tie rod ends, sway bar end links, just tighten up the whole front end so we can get this truck rolling down the road.
All right, so we got the whole front end torn apart here. It took us about an hour and a half to break this side down. And as you can see down here, we got a good comparison of the parts that we're putting on versus what we took off. So our good friends at DJM, they gave us a 3-inch drop spindle, which is going to get us that stance that we're looking for. Outer tie rod end, we're going to be throwing on the TTX line from Evotech. And then big thing about owning the GMT 400 trucks that we really like is that it is just so cheap to get parts for these trucks. So upper, lower control arm and the tie rod end, you're looking at about $200 per side all in. And if you look at your time, what is your time worth? Well, personally, pressing bushings in and out isn't a whole lot of fun. So to get it ready to install and ready to roll saves us a bunch of work, and it's just pretty accessible to do so. So we got this stuff from Rock Auto. We're going to be putting on the lowers. Uppers, we're keeping the factory spring because the mileage on this truck, it's only got about 130, so we're hoping that it's going to be good. And I have read on some forums that aftermarket springs can squeak a little bit in this pocket if the OD on the spring is off. I did read about a guy having trouble with that, making a bunch of noise. So we're hoping we're going to get away with the factory spring, but we got new lowers, uppers, tie rods, and spindles. So hopefully this thing's going to be noise-free going down the road. So stick with us, and we're going to throw this stuff on and show you some tips and tricks, especially with getting that lower spring in there. I know that can be a bear for some guys. So here we go.
As we're tearing down this side of the truck, we found a pretty good power steering leak, so we had to figure that one out. But fortunately, power steering fluid did a fantastic job of preserving this frame. We're still doing some cleanup in here, but you can see it kept everything super clean, and we're pretty stoked with how nice the truck is coming out.
All right, so now that we got all that old stuff out of the way, it's time to start putting the shiny new parts on. For this lower control arm, one thing of note is you got to swap over your factory bump stop, but it just gets on there with one bolt, so that's no problem. Now, what we figured out is we just tried to throw this in there for a quick test fit, and the spacing between these two is slightly different than what's on the frame, so it doesn't want to just go up in there. What our plan of attack is going to be for this is we've got a arm from a jack, and we are planning to get it started because it'll squeeze into those two lower ears in the frame, and then we're going to go jack a little bit here, jack a little bit here, and try and shimmy it up into the frame. If you're on a lift, be careful doing that. You don't want to tip the truck over, so we're going to go a little bit at a time, probably some tapping with a hammer, and then once we can get this hole kind of moon-eyed in the frame, we've got a couple different tapered punches here, and we're just going to try and tap them in and then walk it in and get it in where it needs to go. The factory lower control arm bolts do also have a taper on the tip of them as well. So once you get it about 90% there, usually you can smack that sucker in there and it'll all center itself back up. Other things for those bolts too, two different lengths, right? So the longer one goes in the front and the shorter one goes towards the back of the vehicle. So it's important to take note of, you know, get those backwards after working so hard. So that's what our plan is. We're gonna go do it right now. We do have a little bit of, just a little bit of grease to try and help slide this in there. We cleaned it up as best we could, make sure there's limited grime. So as you can see, they'll slide in there just a bit, but not anywhere close to where we need them to be. And you can see we're just gonna go like here, and Ty's gonna jack it up nice and easy. Yep. All right. Keep going. Good. Keep going. Good. Keep going. All right, stop. And we're going to swap it over to my side now. Let's see if we get our drop light going here. Hopefully that doesn't wash it out too bad. You can see we kind of got that half moon in there. So our plan is we're just going to drive this over with the punch a little bit at a time. Same thing with the other side. And then hopefully we can walk those bolts in at the end of it. There we go. And let's see if we can send her home. I got my washer in there. All right. And they're it. We got to swap over that other one so it's going the right way, but that should be a wrap for the lower. All right, so we got that lower zipped in there. Now the upper's going in. Fortunately, we've had more luck with these just kind of going in. A couple things to watch out for. Make sure you're not pinching any of these ABS or brake lines. And then you can see with these two uppers, they pretty much, little love tap, those are going to go right home. So no big deal there. A couple things to note for your upper control arms on these trucks. And this is going to apply to both 15 and 2500s. You got your cam bolts here, which are going to be used for alignment. For the orientation of these, first of all, there's a bevel on your washer. So you're going to want the bevel to be towards the walls that you are fastening this up against. Other thing for this as well, for the head of the bolt, you're going to want to put it in a spot where your alignment guy is going to be able to get to it. So while you could put it in this way, it's going to be a tough time for him to get in there and actually adjust your camber there. So what we like to do is put the heads of the bolts towards the inside, so it'll slide in like that, and then you'll put on your second plate and then your nut, and then the same thing on this side as well. So that way when the guy's doing the alignment, he can get a wrench on him easier. Other things to note, knockouts. So the frame on some trucks is going to have knockouts not removed. This truck has them removed. So you can see how this is a big oval here, front and rear here. On some trucks that don't have the knockouts removed from the factory, it's just going to be a round hole. And what that's going to do is that's going to severely limit the amount of alignment that you can get. So if you go take it to a shop and they say they got to take the knockouts out, well, that's because they're in there from the factory. So fortunately for us, these are already got removed. If you're trying to take your own out, you can either get the knockout removal tool, or you can try and go at it with a die grinder. But I would recommend taking them out if you're doing any kind of changes like we are with the drop kit. So that's our plan. We're going to throw this sucker in there, get the cam bolts in, and then it's time to get that spring in there. So here we go. All right, we got these two snugged up, upper and lowers are ready to go. Now it's time for the real fun part, getting this spring in here. Now, a couple things for this spring. Directional. So you've got, it looks like a flat on the coil up top here. Not as much of one on the bottom. So that part's going to go down, and then this part goes up. You got an isolator. I'd recommend new ones, but we're going to be reusing the old ones. So that goes on top. And what this is going to do is slide up into the frame, and there's a little bucket in there. You've got the outside here, and then the inside has kind of like a cup that sits inside here. So it's important when you slide the spring up into the frame that this gets seated inside that cup inside there. Now, to compound the issue, the spring coil here does mate with a indent. I'll get you some light. I don't know if that'll help you. Mates with an indent right here. So the bottom of that coil wants to go in there like that. Now, this is generally the worst part of doing suspension work. We are going to elect to try and do this without a spring compressor. So we're going to show you some tips and tricks on how we're planning to do that. One of those starts with, we like to start by putting the knuckle on the lower arm first before we start fighting that spring. So that way, once we get it seated, there's no messing around. We're not wasting any time. We can go ahead and squeeze that in there and get it snugged up just to minimize the risk of injury and danger with these heavy duty springs. So we're going to start with that. Just slide that down on there, just start the threads. You don't have to kill these, just snug it up on that lower ball joint. And that should be plenty right there. We got our spring, we got our isolator on the top. Now I'm going to slide that into that cup in the frame that we were just talking about. So there we go, that's where she wants to live. Now you get to cock your spring so it's approximately in the right location, like so. Now as you can see, this is where the spring sits and that's where the lower control arm is. And here's where the real fun begins. It's really a balancing act. We're trying to get this guy rotated up slightly, and we're just going to shimmy by increase the control arm. We're going to tap on here, try and rotate the spring in, and we're just going to shimmy it up, kind of like how we got that lower one in there. So, all right, here's where the fun really begins. Make sure that guy's in the cup. It feels good.
Go up a little more.
And the first thing you're going to do, if you want to get in here, Nick, is the spring, you can get it to just catch on the lip of these retaining, these welded nuts that are for the shock. So you can get that thing to just catch on there, and that's like your first step of where you want to go. Give me a little more. Give me a little more. Good. All right, now, once you've got it a little bit further, it's no longer resting on that nut that we were talking about. It's now getting caught on this cutout here. So the edge of the spring is below this lip. What you got to do is take a second pump jack, lift up on this bottom portion here, and then tap it over and hopefully send it home into its pocket where it wants to go. Focus, focus. Yeah, you can see the edge of that spring is underneath the lip that it needs to go over to get into this pocket here. So we're going to be jacking up on this while hammering from the outside to get it to pop in where it wants to go. Okay. A little more. Good. Just a gentle amount of preload on it. If you do it too much, it's going to spring right out of there. We'll see if we get lucky. Go up a little more, Ty. Not on this one, on the other one. Okay, let's try that.
More?
A little more. Okay. We got it. Now, here's where that spindle coming on here pays dividends. Keep going. Keep going. Another 2.
Get a nut on that.
All right, we got our 2 nuts on. There we go. Springs in. Knuckles on. That's how to do it without a spring compressor. Sweet. Now that we got that spindle in there, we're ready to go ahead and start putting on our sway bar end links. So these are directional, so that point that is extended up is going to go, what's going to sandwich between the lower control arm and the sway bar. There's the flat side, and that flat side is going to go to your washer like so. I'd recommend just throwing a little bit of general purpose grease on these just to make sure that there's no squeaking for your brand new suspension rebuild that you're doing. All right, so like I said, we squeezed that down and we got that sway bar end link on there. Up next, we're just going to put on our outer tie rod ends. Useful tip, if your old ones are really crusty like these are, you can just give them a comparison and then put the mark, I got a little blue line on where I'm going to screw it down to. If your stuff is pretty nice, you could use a piece of blue tape before you take these off so you can get at least kind of close to the same amount of toe on your ride. So we're going to screw these into the ends here. After that, we got to put on our backing plate, so we'll put on our 3 there, throw on our rotor, and then we got a little clip there for how we got the bearings in. And then once that's done, we'll just clean up the caliper, spray it on, and it should be good to go. One last thing as well is for both the brake line and this ABS sensor. This one won't have a bolt in it, and that is correct how it comes to you. You want to feed these through, and then they actually supply you with a 4th bolt. You put it in from the bottom, throw the nut on there, and then it should be good to go. So I'm going to get to work on that, and just like magic, when you come back, it'll be done. Here we go with a voiceover for what we're doing with these rotors here. So we got them removed off the truck, pulled them off the spindles, just got to remove the cotter pin and the big castle nut. They'll pull right off the spindle. So once you get them out, the inner and outer bearings will just fall out. They shouldn't be stuck in there, but the races will remain inside of the rotor. So if you're like us, you're going to be reusing your rotor as long as it's still in spec. What you're going to have to do is drive those old races out. So no secret to it, just walk around the old race with a punch and they will pop out both on the front and back side. Now here's part numbers for your bearings and the outer seal. So as you can see, we got the old ones out, new bearings compared to it, looks like it's going to fit, and we got them all cleaned up. Wiping out the old bearing for any assembly grease that might be on there, and then we brake cleaned and made sure there are no burrs or nicks on the old rotor. Now we're going to put a little bit of grease on the new race that we're getting ready to press in, and making sure that, again, no burrs, nicks, no dirt in there that we're going to hinder our progress of getting that in there. Now, there's the right way and the get it done way of putting your bearings in. The right way would be using a hydraulic press and a bearing driver. We have neither of those, so what I'm using is a hammer and the old bearing race that we drove out, and I'm walking that around the new bearing, gently tapping it, again, in a circular pattern to slowly drive that bearing down where it needs to go. One thing you're probably going to find out as you're doing this is one, you'll be able to hear and feel when the new bearing is all the way driven down and seated home where it wants to go. That'll be a distinct change in the pitch of it. And the other thing that you're probably going to notice is as it gets seated almost 100% down, the old bearing that you're using to drive in the new one is going to get stuck in the hole. So as you can see right there, she's not coming out. So it's a pretty simple fix for this one. Take a punch, chisel, whatever you got, just be gentle and just tap around the edge. As you can see, this round one I was using, I didn't like how it was skipping off there, so I got a little bit wider flat blade punch out of the kit. And see, bam, pops right out. So we got that one in. Rinse and repeat for the other side. No big deal there. Now, once you get your inner and outer races seated in all the way, go ahead and get a little bit of grease, pack it into your new bearings, front and rear. They make a tool for that, or you could just use gloves in your hand and drop them in there. Last thing you got to do is get the outer race seal in there. Part number we showed you earlier, and then again I'm just going to use the old race that we knocked out initially and use that to walk it around in a circle and then drive that seal in there. Careful that you don't drive it down too far, just make it flush with the edge of the rotor there. Take your time with that and it should be pretty easy to get in there. There you go.